Good afternoon. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces will now come to order. Today we'll be taking testimony on the Department of Energy's Fiscal Year 2011 budget for atomic energy defense activities. The President's budget request for DOE's defense activities, including nuclear weapons, nonproliferation, and waste cleanup, is almost $18 billion for fiscal year 2011, an increase of over 7% from last year's appropriated level. This request, which must be authorized by our committee, amounts to almost two-thirds of the entire budget request for the Department of Energy. Let me begin the hearing today by welcoming our three distinguished witnesses. First, we have Mr. Tom D'Agostino, the Undersecretary of Energy for Nuclear Security and Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration. Secretary, it is a pleasure to have you here once again. Mr. D'Agostino is a graduate of the Naval Academy and the Naval War College. As an officer in the Nuclear Navy, he distinguished himself as the program manager for the Seawolf submarine propulsion system. He retired from the Navy Reserve as a captain, and since joining the DOE in 1990, Mr. D'Agostino has had a distinguished career in increasingly responsible roles, assuring the safety, security, and reliability of the nation's nuclear stockpile. Welcome back to the subcommittee. Second, Dr. Ines Trier, DOE's Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management, has agreed to appear before the subcommittee today. Dr. Trier received her bachelor's degree in chemistry and her doctorate degree in physical chemistry from the University of Miami in Florida. Her career has included key positions at the Los Alamos National Laboratory and as DOE's manager of the Carlsbad Field Office in New Mexico. She spearheaded national efforts to accelerate the cleanup of transuranic waste sites and disposal at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in Carlsbad. Since joining DOE's headquarters staff in 2005, she has worked tirelessly to expedite the cleanup of the legacy left behind by DOE's Cold War nuclear programs. Welcome back, Dr. Trier, and we look forward to your testimony here today as well. Finally, Dr. Peter Winiker, Chairman of the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, is with us this afternoon. This is Dr. Winiker's first opportunity, I believe, to appear before the subcommittee, and I may be the first public appearance as Chairman of the DNFSB, having just been appointed to that post by President Obama last Friday. Congratulations, Dr. Winiker, on that. Dr. Winiker has received his bachelor's degree in physics from Cooper Union in New York and his doctorate from the University of Maryland. He has worked in senior technical positions at Sandia National Laboratories and the Army's Harry Diamond Laboratories, and has been a member of the Defense Science Board since 2006. Welcome again, Dr. Winiker, to you too, and again to all of our witnesses, and thank you for being here today. We greatly look forward to your testimony. This committee has a long history of supporting the critical missions performed by the Department, including ensuring the reliability, safety, and security of our nuclear stockpile, conducting the scientific, engineering, and production activities necessary to support the stockpile, keeping our nuclear weapons and the weapons complex safe from physical, cyber, and other threats, leading the government's international nuclear nonproliferation efforts, and cleaning up the environmental legacy of nuclear stockpile work. But the committee has also had an equally long-standing record of vigilant oversight. In the late 1990s, in the wake of security and safety problems in the nuclear weapons complex, committee members, including Mac Thornberry and now Undersecretary Ellen Tauscher, spearheaded efforts to enact Title 32 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2000. And, as you know, create the NNSA as a separately organized agency within the Department of Energy. In the late 1980s, with the high cost of cleaning up the legacy Cold War weapons production was just beginning to be uncovered, John Spratt and now Senator John Kyle led this committee's efforts to create a separate organization within the department to manage the environmental cleanup program. During that same era, the committee played a key role in ensuring that the department's operational activities would be subject to oversight by an independent body by leading the legislative effort to establish the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board as part of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1989. So you see, each of your organizations can trace its heritage to the rigorous oversight performed by this subcommittee. Having assumed the chairmanship of the subcommittee just last summer, let me assure you that assure the witnesses that I'm committed to continuing our tradition of rigorous oversight and doing so in a very bipartisan manner. And we look forward to partnering with you in the efforts that you perform for our nation, and we're grateful to all of you for your service. That said, we're eager to hear your testimony on fiscal year 2011 budget request. Let me begin by just giving a Undersecretary D'Agostino, I'm especially interested in how the NNSA intends to implement the stockpile management plan mandated by Section 3113 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2010. This statute is probably the most recent example of the bipartisan efforts of our committee, and I believe it can form the framework for an enduring consensus to assure the health, safety, and the security of the stockpile. Assistant Secretary Trier, last year's economic stimulus package contained more than $5 billion to accelerate defense environmental cleanup activities. We look forward to hearing from you on how these funds have been used and how efforts undertaken with stimulus funding differ from the core work of the cleanup program originally as it began. Finally, Chairman Winiker, I believe it's only the fifth time that the board has appeared before the subcommittee in its 20-year history and the first time since 1996. In your testimony here today, I'd like you to please provide us with your candid views about the most challenging safety issues that DOE and NNSA face, both in ongoing operations and in the construction of new facilities. These are some of the concerns that we hope you'll address in your statements this afternoon and during our discussions that will follow your testimony. Again, we look forward to hearing from you. With that, let me turn now to the ranking member, Mr. Turner, for any comments that he may have. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to welcome Mr. D'Agostino and Dr. Trier and Dr. Winiker. I also understand that you were just confirmed last week by the Senate. Congratulations on your confirmation. And I want to thank all of you for your leadership and for your work, for your service to the nation, and we look forward to hearing your message here today. As I noted last week during our hearing on U.S. strategic posture, we are in the midst of some potentially significant changes in our nuclear policy and posture. The Nuclear Posture Review, NPR, should be released within the coming weeks, and according to press reports, the U.S. and Russia are close to completing a new strategic arms reduction treaty START. These events are likely to have considerable implications for our nation's nuclear stockpile and infrastructure. At this same budget hearing last year, I commented that fiscal year 2010 was a year of, quote, treading water, close quote. The science and engineering campaigns were stagnant, key decisions on warhead refurbishment were avoided, and key construction projects were halted. The Strategic Posture Commission observed that NNSA had a reasonable plan for transforming the complex, but lacked the needed funding. All these decisions were on hold pending the completion of the NPR, which we still have not received. Mr. D'Agostino, last year, you testified that we were in a, quote, one-year budget scenario. There are a lot of flatline numbers when you look at our program, particularly into the out years. Continuing to quote you, you said, I don't like the idea of having flatline numbers in the out years because it sends a signal to our workforce that the country thinks that it's got no future, close quote. You're right. Flatline numbers do send a signal, which is why it is a welcome change to see a 13% increase in this year's budget request for NNSA. What this request tells us is that the administration does recognize, as Vice President Biden recently said, that our, quote, nuclear complex and experts were neglected and underfunded, close quote. However, commitment to the sustainment and modernization of our nation's deterrence capabilities cannot be measured with a single year's budget request. So I hope to see this new level of commitment continuing into the out years. It appears that the administration has embraced the stockpile management program established by this committee last year and will fund more comprehensive life extension programs, surveillance activities, warhead safety and security enhancements, and infrastructure modernization. Mr. D'Agostino, I hope that you will address these efforts in your testimony today. And I do want to pause for a minute to give you credit. I've spoken to you privately, and I want to say it publicly. The amount of credit I think you deserve for this, you've been very outspoken on the needs of the NNSA. You've provided a plan for addressing the issues that have been raised, and you've been successful as a voice in the administration for securing this important additional investment, and I appreciate your commitment and accomplishment here. I would also like your thoughts on the recent Json report on life extension options for U.S. nuclear weapons. I was concerned about how certain findings in the report were being interpreted, basically that, quote, everything is fine, stick with the status quo, close quote, because that is not what I was hearing in briefings and visits to the labs. So I asked the 3 nuclear security lab directors to comment on these findings, and earlier today I released their letters to me. One lab director wrote that certain findings, quote, understate the challenges and risks, and also understate the future risks that we must anticipate, basically in sustaining the nuclear U.S. Stockpile. Another wrote that current approaches cannot sustain our weapons for decades because, quote, the available mitigation actions are reaching their limits, close quote. The Strategic Posture Commission concluded that current warhead life extension programs could not be counted on indefinitely. We would ask today whether you could help us understand why improvements in the safety, security, and reliability of the stockpile would require changes from current life extension approaches. The committee also must have confidence that the additional funds received by NNSA can be spent wisely, whether in the weapons activities account or nonproliferation account. In previous years, the nonproliferation program had difficulty executing the funding it received, and as a result carried over large unspent balances from year to year. This year, the nonproliferation program request has grown by 26%. This growth is a reflection of the President's direction provided in a speech last April in Prague to secure all vulnerable nuclear material around the world within 4 years. This is a noble undertaking, but a year later, the committee still has not received the administration's plans. Therefore, it's difficult to assess whether this 26% plus up can be spent wisely. In the area of environmental management, I want to take a moment to highlight a success story. Miamisburg Mound in my district in Ohio was once a key Cold War-era nuclear production facility. After an extensive environmental management cleanup effort, thanks in large part to the leadership of Dr. Trier and her predecessors, Mound has been redeveloped into a business park for high-tech companies. I also want to recognize that Bob DeGrasse had a hand in that also, as he's gone through various phases of his career. There are many other sites across the country that require cleanup funds, and as the nuclear complex continues to shrink and additional Cold War-era facilities are decommissioned, the list will only get longer. Dr. Trier, I would appreciate an update on the progress you have made for your priorities and the challenges ahead. I would also like to hear how the environmental management has spent the $5 billion it received in stimulus funds last year and how you ensure oversight and accountability of those funds. As I've said in previous years, I'm deeply concerned about safety and security. There is no margin for error in the nuclear business. I would appreciate an update on NNSA's efforts to implement its new graded security protection policy. I also look forward to hearing Dr. Winiker's assessment of the key safety issues at our nation's defense nuclear facilities, particularly with respect to new construction projects. And on a final note, I said earlier that budgets send a signal. Policies also send a signal. We all share the President's vision of a world without nuclear weapons. However, I worry when I hear administration officials discuss it as a policy, because as we all know, policy drives strategy, programs, and budgets. Though we're seeing a one-year influx of funding, I'm concerned that a zero policy, once implemented, would lead to less program and budget support in the out years. And that is not in the best interest of our national security. Mr. D'Agostino, Dr. Trier, and Dr. Winiker, thank you again for being with us today. You each possess a tremendous amount of expertise and insight into our nation's nuclear stockpile and infrastructure, and our nation is better off as a result of your service. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank the ranking member. In particular, I want to thank you for those comments. And before we turn to the witnesses, I want to comment on the points you raised in particular about the Json panel report on life extension options. And I appreciate your efforts to elicit the lab director's views on that report. And I believe that it would be very helpful to have an opportunity to explore the differences between the Json panel and the lab directors in a classified briefing. And so yesterday I asked Secretary D'Agostino if he would help arrange a meeting for subcommittee members with the lab directors and the Json study leaders, and he's agreed, and we appreciate that. And we've also consulted with the chairman of the Json, and he also welcomes the opportunity. So I expect that in very short order we'll have the chance to explore these issues in full detail. So
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just
Sure.
one note on that. I think the lab directors in the Jason's report on the classified area are probably in agreement. It's the issue of the declassified version, and perhaps out of our hearing, if we have a classified hearing, something on the unclassified side could come out that might be even more helpful to clarify it. So
Yep, and I'm sure we can do both of those. So, well, with that, I know that we have received a prepared statement for each of our witnesses, and these will be entered into the record. So if you could, please summarize the key points so that we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. And I guess we will begin with Secretary D'Agostino. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here today before you to discuss the Department of Energy's fiscal year 2011 budget request for the National Nuclear Security Administration. Last year, when I appeared before the subcommittee, the focus of my testimony was the continuing transformation of an old, Cold War, outdated nuclear weapons complex and shifting it into a 21st century nuclear security enterprise, and our initial efforts in implementing the President's nuclear security agenda. Since that time, we've defined a portfolio of programs to carry out the nuclear security agenda. Our budget request, as you've noted, is $11.2 billion, an increase of more than 13% from last year. In developing this portfolio, Secretary Chu and I worked very closely with Secretary Gates to ensure that we remain focused on meeting Department of Defense requirements. Within our overall funding request, weapons activities account increases nearly 10% to a level of $7 billion. The Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation increases nearly 26% to $2.7 billion, and naval reactors increases more than 13% to a level of $1.1 billion. Our request can be summarized in four components that collectively ensure we can implement the President's direction outlined in his April 2009 Prague speech and reinforced during his State of the Union address. First, our request describes NNSA's crucial role in implementing the President's nuclear security agenda, including his call to secure all vulnerable nuclear material around the world within 4 years. The $2.7 billion request for our nonproliferation programs includes key programs directly linked to the President's agenda, including nearly $560 million for the Global Threat Reduction Initiative to secure all vulnerable nuclear material at civilian sites worldwide, over $1 billion for a fissile material disposition program to permanently eliminate 68 metric tons of surplus weapons-grade plutonium and more than 200 metric tons of surplus highly enriched uranium, and over $350 million for the nonproliferation verification research and development programs to provide technical support for arms control and for nonproliferation. The second component is our investment in the tools and capabilities required to effectively manage the stockpile. Based on our preliminary analysis of the draft nuclear posture review, we in the Department of Defense concluded that maintaining the safety, security, and effectiveness of the enduring nuclear deterrent requires increased investments to strengthen an aging physical infrastructure and sustain a depleted technical human capital base. Our request includes more than $7 billion to ensure the capabilities required to complete ongoing weapons life extension programs, to strengthen the science, technology, and engineering base, to reinvest in the scientists, technicians, and engineers who carry out the NNSA missions. These activities are consistent with the Stockpile Management Program responsibilities outlined in the Fiscal Year 2010 National Defense Authorization Act that you mentioned earlier. In previous testimony, I have discussed the challenges facing Stockpile Stewardship Program and how to make effective use of the program's full suite of science-based tools and capabilities. And I'm pleased to report that there has been excellent progress. Each day, we're coming closer to realizing the promise of the National Ignition Facility at the Lawrence Livermore Lab for Stewardship. The scientists at NIF have already completed an important series of experiments that have provided critical validations of advanced modeling used in weapons assessments in a very relevant regime. The National Ignition Facilities produced over 1 megajoule of laser energy, more than 30 times the energy available at the Omega laser, and the community completed key ignition preparatory experiments at NIF and Omega. This program is on track for the first experiments on thermonuclear ignition later this year. The Z facility at Sandia continues to provide the state-of-the-art materials data For example, the equation of state of a material for advanced safety methods was measured at pressures 10 times those previously possible. The Z facility also increases its X-ray output by 50% to a level essential for weapons component certification. The dual-access radiographic hydrodynamic testing facility, or DART, facility at Los Alamos successfully conducted its first full hydrodynamic test that included multi-pulse and multi-axis radiography and delivered results of exceptional quality. This is an incredible achievement by the laboratory. Operations at these key science facilities will provide the critical high-energy density physics materials measurement data that we need to enhance and strengthen our science-based certification approaches in order to maintain our deterrent. While we're very pleased with the contributions of the above-noted facilities, as Vice President Biden highlighted in his speech, we need to continue to invest in modern, sustainable infrastructure that supports the full range of NNSA's mission, not just stockpile stewardship. He stated that this investment, and I quote, "This investment is not only consistent with our nonproliferation agenda, it is essential to it." And there is an emerging bipartisan consensus that now is the time to make these investments to provide the foundation for future U.S. security, as noted by Senator Sam Nunn and Secretaries George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, and William Perry last January. This leads me to the third component, our investment in recapitalizing our nuclear infrastructure and deterrent capability into a 21st century nuclear security enterprise. As the Vice President also stated last month, and I quote, "Some of the facilities we use to handle uranium and plutonium date back to the days when the world's great powers were led by Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. The signs of age and decay are becoming more and more apparent every day." The request includes specific funds to continue the design of the uranium processing facility at our Y-12 plant and the construction of the chemistry and metallurgy research replacement facility at Los Alamos. The Naval Reactors request includes funds to address the Ohio-class replacement, including a new reactor plant, and our need to refuel one of our land-based prototypes to provide the platform to demonstrate the manufacturability of the Ohio replacement core and realistically test systems and components. Mr. Chairman, investing now in a modern, sustainable nuclear security enterprise is the right thing to do. The investment will support the full range of nuclear security missions, including stockpile stewardship, nonproliferation, arms control and treaty verification, nuclear counterterrorism, nuclear forensics, and naval nuclear propulsion. All of these things together to beef up and support our security. Finally, and lastly, the fourth component, one that ties all our missions together, is our commitment to aggressive management reform across the NNSA. With increased resources provided by Congress comes increased responsibility on our part to be effective stewards of taxpayers' money and to ensure that the NNSA is an efficient and cost-effective enterprise. We take this responsibility very seriously. We initiated a zero-based security review to implement greater efficiencies and to drive down these costs while sustaining highly effective security capabilities. Our Supply Chain Management Center has already saved taxpayers more than $130 million, largely through e-sourcing and strategic sourcing. Finally, I and the entire NNSA leadership team stress performance and financial accountability at all levels of our organization for our operations. In 2009, our programs met or exceeded 95% of their performance objectives. And as we continue to reduce the percentage of carryover, uncosted, uncommitted balances in several of our nonproliferation programs. And I'll be glad to go into the detail during the question and answer. The investments made to date in the nuclear security enterprise are providing the tools to address a broad array of nuclear security challenges. However, we must continue to cultivate the talents of our people to use those tools effectively, because our highly dedicated workforce is really, in the end, the key to our success. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be pleased to respond to your questions.
Very good. Secretary, thank you very much for your testimony. And Secretary Trier, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman Langevin, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today and to address your questions regarding the Office of Environmental Management's Fiscal Year 2011 budget request. The Office of Environmental Management's mission is to complete the legacy environmental cleanup left by the Cold War in a safe, secure, and compliant manner. I am very pleased that we were able to present to Congress a budget that positions the program to be fully compliant with our regulatory commitments and supports reducing the risks associated with one of our highest environmental risk activities, highly radioactive waste in underground tanks, as well as achieve footprint reduction across the legacy cleanup complex. My goal remains to complete quality cleanup work safely, on schedule, and within cost in order to deliver demonstrated value to the American taxpayer. Environmental management cleanup objectives will continue to be advanced in fiscal year 2011 by the infusion of the $6 billion from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Through January 2010, the Office of Environmental Management had obligated $5.7 billion, and as of March the 15th, we have spent $1.55 billion, leading to thousands of jobs created and or saved at our sites. In fiscal year 2011, the Office of Environmental Management will continue to draw on the $6 billion of Recovery Act funds to advance key cleanup goals. Recovery Act funds allow the Office of Environmental Management to meet all of our regulatory compliance requirements in fiscal year 2011. This funding has allowed the Office of Environmental Management to leverage base program dollars, enabling the reduction of our operating footprint from 900 square miles to approximately 540 square miles by the end of fiscal year 2011. This is a 40% reduction, which will position the program to advance forward the ultimate goal of 90% reduction by the end of fiscal year 2015. We're also able to accelerate the legacy cleanup at Brookhaven National Laboratory and the Separations Process Research Unit in New York and Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in California into fiscal year 2011 with Recovery Act funding. This budget request strikes a balance between maintaining support for the Office of Environmental Management's core commitments and programs while strengthening investments in activities needed to ensure the long-term success of our cleanup mission. The budget request significantly increases the Office of Environmental Management investment in science and technology areas that are critical to our long-term success. Specifically, this request targets $60 million in funding to Hanford's Office of River Protection to use in developing and deploying new technologies for treating tank waste. This funding is needed to address near-term technical risks that have been identified, but is also needed to leverage and bring forward new technologies that could help us reduce the life cycle costs and schedule for cleanup of these wastes. The Office of Environmental Management will also continue to strengthen and deploy groundwater and decontamination and decommissioning cleanup technologies. Specifically, we'll continue the development of an integrated high-performance computer modeling capability for waste degradation and contaminant release. This state-of-the-art scientific tool will enable robust and standardized assessments of performance and risk for cleanup and closure activities. This tool will also help us better estimate cleanup time and costs and reduce uncertainties. The request also provides an additional $50 million to accelerate the waste treatment and immobilization plan at Hanford, boosting the budget for the plan to $740 million in fiscal year 2011. The additional funding will be used to accelerate completion of the design for the waste treatment and immobilization plant. Prior to design completion, it is critical that technical issues are addressed and incorporated in a timely manner. Our intent is to mitigate these risks early and get the design matured to 90 or 100%. This fiscal year 2011 request makes a significant investment in the decontamination and decommissioning of the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion plant located in Ohio. This investment enables the Office of Environmental Management to accelerate the cleanup of the Portsmouth site by 15 to 20 years, leading to a significant reduction in the duration and cost of the cleanup. Now that I have given an overview of our fiscal year budget request, I would like to take a few moments to discuss some of the areas I will be focusing on as the program moves forward. The Office of Environmental Management continues to adhere to a safety-first culture that integrates environment, safety, and health requirements and controls into all work activities. Our first priority continues to be the health and safety of our employees and the community surrounding our cleanup sites. It is my duty to ensure that our workers go home as healthy and fit as they came to work. Under my leadership, the program has embarked upon a journey to excellence. We have developed a new business model which provides a solid management base for the Office of Environmental Management to become an excellent, high-performing organization. This implementation is key to performing our cleanup mission effectively and efficiently. A key component in this process is the alignment and understanding of headquarters and field operational roles and responsibilities. Toward that end, our management's attention will continue to focus on improving project performance, aligning project and contract management, streamlining the acquisition process, and continue our very strong performance in awarding cleanup work to small businesses. We will continue to conduct construction project reviews. These reviews examine all aspects of a construction project, including project management, technology, and engineering. These reviews assess the progress of each of our major projects and determine their overall health and ability to meet cost and schedule goals. These reviews are scheduled approximately every 6 to 9 months and are conducted to provide the Office of Environmental Management leadership the ability to proactively reduce project risks so that the issues and solutions can be identified early rather than react once problems are realized. With these improvements, we're confident that the Environmental Management Program can succeed in its mission. Chairman Langevin, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the subcommittee, I look forward to addressing your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Secretary Trier. Chairman Winiker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. This is a period of significant transition for the Department of Energy, which is accompanied by billions in construction projects and a huge portfolio of Recovery Act work. The Board believes it is prudent to proactively address safety issues at DOE's defense nuclear facilities to ward off threats to public health and safety and to resolve safety concerns early in the design process. Our agency was established by Congress in 1988 to provide nuclear safety oversight for the defense nuclear facilities operated by DOE and now NNSA. We analyze facility and system designs, operations, practices, and events with an eye toward ensuring that safety-related controls are identified and implemented. We also carefully evaluate the directives that govern work by DOE and NNSA. We provide our findings to DOE and NNSA so they can take the actions that are needed to ensure that public health and safety, including worker safety, are protected adequately. The Board evaluates DOE and NNSA's activities in the context of integrated safety management. When properly implemented at all levels, integrated safety management results in facility designs that efficiently address hazards, operating procedures that are safe and productive, and feedback that drives continuous improvement in both safety and efficiency. The Board's safety oversight targets several broad safety issues. To begin with, the Board puts a great deal of effort into ensuring that DOE preserves and continually improves its safety directives. The Board constantly emphasizes that nuclear hazards are different and demand a safety strategy that is based on defense in depth, redundancy, technical competence, and research and development. There are no shortcuts to nuclear safety. The Board strives to ensure that DOE considers safety early in the design of new defense nuclear facilities. DOE and NNSA are designing and building facilities with a total project cost of more than $20 billion. I cannot overstate how important it is to integrate safety into the design of these facilities at an early stage. Failing to do this will lead to surprises and costly changes late in the process. The Board is committed to the early resolution of safety issues with DOE. In that regard, the Board provides quarterly reports to Congress on the status of significant unresolved technical differences between the Board and DOE on issues concerning the design and construction of DOE's defense nuclear facilities. The Board is continuing to urge NNSA to replace unsound facilities and invest in infrastructure for the future. The 9212 complex at Y12 and the Chemistry and Metallurgy Research Building at Los Alamos are both well overdue for replacement. NNSA's newer facilities, and by newer I mean facilities that are 10 to 30 years old as opposed to 50 to 60 years old, need upgrades to make sure they will remain safe and reliable. The Board is working to ensure that DOE and NNSA safely manage their large inventory of nuclear materials. The H Canyon at the Savannah River site is DOE's preferred disposition path to many materials that have been declared excess to national security needs, and it has operated safely for many years. DOE will need to maintain it well and carefully consider how long it can operate safely. The Board is paying close attention as both DOE and NNSA reevaluate their roles in overseeing the work of their contractors. In January, NNSA began a 6-month moratorium on its reviews that is intended to free up resources for mission work while NNSA develops a new approach to oversight that emphasizes self-assurance by its contractors. Last week, DOE issued a safety and security reform plan that will redefine the extent to which the DOE Office of Health, Safety, and Security exercises independent oversight of DOE and NNSA. The board plans to hold a public meeting on federal safety oversight for defense nuclear facilities later this spring, at which it expects to thoroughly address these reform initiatives. Finally, federal sponsorship of research, analysis, and testing in nuclear safety technologies is an important component of federal safety oversight. The board is continuing to emphasize the need for DOE and NNSA to lead an organized effort in R&D for nuclear safety. This ends my statement. I will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Winiker, and for all of you for your testimony. Let me begin with, if I could, with Secretary D'Agostino on a couple of things. First of all, Secretary, while the President has yet to finalize the nuclear posture review, the NNSA's budget contains numerous program budget initiatives that are based on a draft of the posture review. So my question is, are you confident that these initiatives will continue to be valid when the final NPR is released? For example, press reports indicate that there's discussion about the continued requirement for forward-based nuclear weapons in Europe. And how would a decision to reduce or eliminate these weapons affect, for example, the B-61 life extension program?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very confident, 100% confident, that the proposal the President and the administration and I have before you, sir, is very, very consistent with the nuclear posture review, based on a couple of pieces of information. One, of course, of the Department of Energy, and I personally have been involved in the drafting of this document, going through the various decision points and looking for that common ground, those pieces, if you will, that will have to be done regardless of maybe a final policy decision on a specific area or not. Specifically, your question on the B-61 in Europe, the one thing what we have come out with is that there will be a triad, and an element of that, of course, is an air-delivered warhead. I mean, the numbers, of course, will come out as part of the nuclear posture review. But while I can't comment specifically on the Europe question right now, I can't do that publicly. What I can say is we know that the future stockpile will have a bomb in it. We know that B-61 is essentially the bomb that we have in the U.S. arsenal that will satisfy the requirement for the triad. And we know for a fact that the B-61 bomb is in dire need of life extension. And so regardless of the specifics of, warheads in Europe, that we are still going to need to work on that bomb. It's got old radars, it's got security features and safety features that can and should be upgraded, and it needs a significant amount of work. So in essence, I'm very comfortable with where we are with the President's budget request. It's totally consistent with the draft NPR that I've been working on, and the final stages of the NPR that we've been reviewing, in fact, even today, as we get close to release on the report, or the review, sorry.
Very good. Thank you. On another matter that may or may not be included in the NPR is a limit on the options for managing the stockpile. If the President decides to preclude replacement options for managing the stockpile, can NNSA continue to ensure the safety, security, and reliability of the stockpile?
The answer is yeah. We will. Our primary goal is the safety, security, and reliability of the stockpile. Eliminating options on how to do that might put us in space in an area that will make it more difficult to meet the tenets of the stockpile management program. But the key message in our discussions within the administration is that basic tenets and principles of the stockpile management plan put out by the National Defense Authorization Act are our guiding principles for managing the stockpile. The NPR will talk about the specific point that you bring up on replacement. But we still need to work on the security upgrades, and we can do pieces of it without it, but we can't go all the way. So it's a matter of degree. The specific degree on what else replacement gets you can't be discussed publicly, but we'd be happy to provide a classified response or discuss it in a classified session with you, possibly at the Json or the Json meeting that you had referenced earlier, Mr. Chairman.
So you're confident that when the NPR comes out, the definitions of what management is and such will be fully defined and discussed in the report?
I'm confident that in the versions that I've been working on, that we want to make sure that this question of how far we can go is put out there, is made clear. And I think there's always risk management is a term that we use a lot in the program management business, is allowing you to do a next step buys down so much risk in a particular area. So there's really it's a program management question in many respects of allowing the program to move this far down track, takes away this risk, and the question is it worth it? But given where we are right now, our main focus ultimately is to fully implement the principles of the stockpile management program that the NDA has laid out. And that's essentially a drumbeat and theme that we want to use and have been using internally, and we will be using this externally as we go out and talk about the NPR as it's ready.
Very good. Thank you for that answer.
Yes, sir.
Secretary Trier, your testimony reminds us that we have a national debt of between $190 and $250 billion yet to be paid to clean up the legacy of the Cold War era nuclear activities, including weapons production. Could we harness the increased momentum created by the stimulus funding provided last year, help you pay down this debt more quickly and at a lower cost than would otherwise be the case? And second, are you making efforts to retain employees hired and trained to do the specialized cleanup work after the stimulus projects are completed?
I believe that with respect to the progress that we're making, the fact that we are going to be able to reduce the operational footprint of the environmental management program by 40% by 2011 is testimony to the fact that the maintenance cost that we have to spend in order to open the doors of the environmental management complex every morning can indeed be addressed by getting to economies of scale that have been possible by the Recovery Act. The Recovery Act consists of footprint reduction, and in particular, transuranic waste disposition, low-level waste disposition, soil and groundwater remediation, and excess facilities decontamination and decommissioning. In particular, I would like to highlight that we are going to be completing the legacy cleanup at 3 facilities in the complex, that we are going to dramatically decrease the operational footprint in the environmental management complex, that our National Defense Authorization Act update for the first time is going to be delineating a reduction of the life cycle costs as a result of the investment on Recovery Act. That reduction is going to be on the order of $4 billion on the life cycle costs, and an additional cost avoidance that gets reflected in the environmental liability of the federal government. I am convinced that the productivity that one can attain by the investment of the monies in the Recovery Act are going to be evident as we move forward in the cleanup of delineated by the activities in the Recovery Act. One point that I would like to also highlight is that we had reported to Congress in the Environmental Management Program that level funding was going to then take us to the year 2017 before we could start dealing with some of the excess facilities declared by other program offices such as NNSA and Science and Nuclear Energy Program Office. And the facilities, the amount of facilities that are not even today in the environmental management portfolio are on the order of 290 facilities. And right now, because of the Recovery Act, we're going to be able to address 55 of those facilities and clean out 6 of the facilities right now by 2011.
Thank you. And just going back also on the workforce retention, are you making efforts to retain employees hired and trained to do the specialized cleanup work after the stimulus projects are completed?
What we're doing is working very closely with the Department of Labor as well as other parts of the administration to ensure that we have a transition plan for those workers that have been trained in the nuclear field as a result of the Recovery Act funds. We think that, number one, the environmental management program with its aging workforce definitely could use some of that talent after 2011, after some of our workers retire from the system as a natural progression of the work that we have been doing in the environmental management complex. But in addition to that, we're going to work across the department and across the administration to ensure that we have a path forward for the transition of those workers. We have some experience in doing that. The Legacy Management Program in the Department of Energy has delineated clear path forwards for the cleanups that we have completed, such as the cleanup at Rocky Flats, at Fernald, and Mount. And we think that we have engaged those transitions in a very effective way, and we intend to do the same for the Recovery Act.
Very good, Secretary. Thank you. Chairman Winiker, if I turn to you, let me in short ask you what keeps you up at night? What's the most troubling safety issue facing the department and its oversight, operation, and construction of defense nuclear facilities right now?
I would put my concerns in 2 broad categories. The first category is facilities. And clearly the department is engaged in $20 billion worth of design and construction of new defense nuclear facilities. This includes the waste treatment plant at Hanford, the salt waste processing facility at Savannah River, the chemistry and metallurgy research replacement facility at Los Alamos, and the uranium processing facility at Y-12. And the board is very actively engaged in being sure that safety is integrated into these projects at the earliest possible stage. This hopefully reduces cost and maintains schedule. The second part of facilities I worry about is we do have unsound facilities in the complex. We have an unsound facility at Y-12, 9212, as well as the CMR facility at Los Alamos. And finally, if I had to talk under facilities about the one facility that I have the most concern, and I have a concern about it because it's so important to the nation, it is the plutonium facility at Los Alamos. That's the facility that deals with plutonium. It's a dangerous material. It deals with weapons-grade and heat source plutonium. And the board recently wrote a recommendation on seismic safety at that facility. That's one category of concerns I have. The other category of concerns I have is about DOE's regulatory reform activities. The Department of Energy in this administration is very actively involved in the reform of its directives. It's very actively involved in the reform of its oversight approaches and initiatives. And as always, the board is very focused on making sure that integrated safety management, which is key to the safe operation of these facilities, protection of the workers and the public, that is constantly being reinvigorated so that we have the foundation in which to ensure safety.
Very good. Thank you for that answer. I know that they place a great deal of a premium on safety at all of our facilities. It can always be room for improvement, a lot of work to do, obviously. I will say I just went out to Los Alamos, and just to show my degree of confidence in the safety and security out there, I went out there on Friday the 13th for my visit. So let me, if I could, on the issue of facilities, though, could you describe for the committee your advice to the Secretary of Energy ensuring that these facilities can safely achieve their missions without busting the DOE budget?
Well, I think that the board is not in a position very often to actually look at the economic impacts of the actions it asks the department to take. But I do think the board, in its statute, is very sensitive to the economic feasibility of what it wants the department to do. And I think that, for example, at Los Alamos, we recently wrote a recommendation to the Secretary of Energy, and the board hopes that, and by the way, the Secretary accepted that recommendation, and when the board looks at the implementation plan, we do believe that it's going to require upgrades to that facility that will cost enough money to get your attention, and I'm sure that will be a problem or a concern of the Administrator and the Secretary of Energy, but certainly the board does not move in the direction of suggesting we need a new pit production facility. The board also tries to manage costs, as I told you, by making sure that we integrate safety very early into the design process. And that's a key approach that we take to make sure that costs remain under control, because if you have to retrofit, that's very costly. And the final thing I would say is that the board is very pragmatic in its approaches at times. We had a situation, once again, at Los Alamos. I don't mean to pick on them, but we did have drums in a specific area that the board felt were a threat to the public. The board agreed with the department that we should process those drums, which were intended to go to the WIP facility, at a facility that really wasn't qualified to handle hazard Category 2 facility materials. But the board still felt that it was the most effective approach to protect public health and safety and most expedient way to do it. And we were mindful, once again, of the economic feasibility of suggesting perhaps that a whole new facility be built to handle that waste. So I don't think we can do well at estimating costs of things, but I think the board is very concerned about economic feasibility.
Thank you. Obviously, your insights into that is very helpful in terms of the guidance that you're giving. Thank you all for your testimony. I have further questions that we'll probably submit for the record. I'm going to turn to the ranking member now for questions. They have called a vote, and I'm not sure. I think there were 3 in this series, so 5. So I'll go with we'll go with the ranking member's questions, and then we'll recess and we'll ask for your indulgence, and we'll be back in short order to continue the hearing. Ranking member is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you heard in my comments, we're all excited to see the 13% increase in this year's budget for NNSA, with the additional $624 million for weapons activities, a 10% increase, and $550 million for nuclear nonproliferation, of 26%. In my comments, Mr. D'Agostino, I commended you for being an outspoken advocate for funding for the agency. And of course, while we celebrate this year, the issue that we're all concerned with is the out years, the needs that are going to be coming forward, including those for key construction projects. And I wondered if you might speak again to us about the issue of what you see in the future and the needs in the future, recognizing that this is not just a one-year infusion of capital that's going to address the issues that you've outlined so well for us.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. I'd be glad to. These are multi-year programs. Everything we do, most of the items we do takes more than 1 year to accomplish. As Chairman Winiker pointed out, nuclear safety is critically important. Upgrading these facilities is important. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the workforce has to understand that the nation considers this important for its security. That's why the Nuclear Posture Review will help on that. So these are all multi-year activities. It's not even just a 5-year. We submit a 5-year look ahead to the committee. But frankly, we plan out well beyond that. We plan out in the 10-year horizon, 10 to 15-year horizon space, whether we're dealing with the warheads themselves or the infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. So I'm keenly focused on making sure that that not just FY11 looks well or even FY12 looks well, that FY16 is understood when we develop our next year's budget, that we have the resources in place in fiscal year 2016. So, in fact, as we start working on the uranium processing facility and the CMR facility, replacement facility designs over the next couple of years with the board, because the board's input is very important early on, we expect the resource requirements in the out years, fiscal years 16 and 17 and 18, to be fairly significant, particularly on the recapitalization space. One of the commitments we have in the department to ensure that we get into effective management of these out-year resources, the Deputy Secretary Poneman recently issued new project management policies to make sure that we get ourselves off the GAO high-risk list, for one, but more importantly, that we become effective stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And some elements of that policy include doing, particularly for complicated facilities, getting 90% of the design work under your belt before we go off and commit to what a facility will cost, what its schedule will be, and what the scope of the facility will be. In the past, we haven't done that, and we end up finding ourselves not fully understanding what it's required. So these are one of the changes that we'll be putting in place. But that out-year commitment is vital to these programs, whether we're talking about the stockpile, whether we're talking about the science, or whether we're talking about the infrastructure.
Well, and in turning to the issue of the stockpile management program and the life extension programs, I wish if you would speak for a moment on the issue of lessening the expectation that for life extension, it also could have been solved by just 1 year of infusion, that this life extension stockpile management program is going to be ongoing, that it's represents a continuing need, and really the seriousness of this is not discretionary. This is something that we need to address absolutely.
Certainly. One thing we're very clear on, we do have many years, a decade and a half under our belt with stockpile stewardship, and we have been watching the stockpile for a long period of time, and we do know that weapons age, components change over time. Not surprisingly, they're in a radiation environment, for example, that we should see that. But every 5 years or so, we see something significant happen in the stockpile, and we have to address it. And we've been fortunate to be able to address it by changing margins or working with the Defense Department to changing our military capabilities. What that says is we have to be prepared for we have to be prepared to take care of something that we don't fully understand exactly today. And so that means the life extension support to the stockpile itself is not just about seeing that set of numbers and increases in years 12, 13, 14, and 15, but it's also seeing that the experimental work that happens in the science campaigns and engineering campaigns continues out as well.
You heard my comments concerning the Json report and the concerns that the declassified portion versus the classified portion might have downplayed some of the risks, and that in asking the lab directors, they've provided us greater clarification of their view of the report. I wondered if you'd provide us your thoughts on the unclassified version and the classified version for the Json report.
Certainly. I think the unclassified version understates the challenges and the risks associated with maintaining the stockpile that is more fully described in the classified section of the report. I don't know why we have that difference, but we do. And so, but I do think it understates the risks. But the unclassified version talks about today's stockpile, that we can maintain today's stockpile today. And it's the concern I have is not just what's happening today, but what's happening out into the future. And since we have this understanding that we have problems come up from time to time that fortunately we have been able to address, what we do know is that we just can't maintain things today like we used to in the past, because we can't make things like we used to in the past. In fact, there are many production lines that we used to make our current stockpile that we don't have fully up and operating. And it would be kind of crazy to go off and try to rebuild that capability. So, in essence, I would look at this as dealing with the problems of our stockpile. We've used up the margins and capabilities there, and in just using, I would say, refurbishment approaches. And so now we know we have to look at other ways to maintain the stockpile. So the challenges are much more significant than I believe than the unclassified report appears to state.
Dr. Tria, I want to thank you again for your dedication on the environmental remediation programs. It makes such a difference. Obviously, we have to live up to the obligation of what the government has left behind. Doing that in a way that is sensitive for economic development potential for communities, and ensuring that we're leaving behind something that is not a threat in the future. Your program received a significant amount of stimulus funds. I know that you spoke of the stimulus funds and your need for ensuring accountability whenever you have a large amount of dollars that are provided you all at once. They have to be appropriately allocated to projects that can move forward now and also that are of the highest need. I appreciate, of course, that the Mound was a recipient of those. Could you speak about that for just a moment? And we have just about a minute where we're going to have to run here and vote, but I would appreciate that.
I believe that the Mound cleanup is an example of how we need to press forward with the rest of the EM portfolio. Number one, a joint vision between the community, the regulators, and the department on what is the end state of the cleanup. And we need to get there as soon as possible in the cleanup. Number two, the fact that we have a responsibility to work with the community so that these resources that we are turning into assets as a result of the cleanup and enter into the vision of the community for their economic future. I believe that we have done that at Mount, and in particular, I believe that the issues associated with what is the vision of the community with respect to this resource that we're giving back to them as a result of the cleanup almost serves as a blueprint of the type of requirements as well as criteria that we need to have in order to move forward with the beneficial reuse of the assets that we are giving back to the community.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the ranking member, and again, we'll go for this series of votes, and we'll be back very shortly to continue the hearing. I thank you all. Committee stands in recess.